jokes at this point. All right. And there came a leper to Jesus, beseeching him, and kneeling down to him, and saying unto Jesus, If you will, you can make me clean. And Jesus, moved with compassion, put forth his hand, and touched him, and said unto him, I will, be thou clean. And as soon as Jesus had spoken, immediately the leprosy departed from him, and the leper was cleansed. And Jesus straitly charged him, and forthwith sent him away, and said unto him, See you say nothing to any man, but go thy way, show yourself to the priest, and offer for thy cleansing those things which Moses commanded for a testimony unto them. But the leper went out and began to publicize it much, and to announce the matter to everyone, insomuch that Jesus could no more openly enter into the cities, but stayed in deserted places. But the crowd still came to him from everywhere. This story of Jesus healing the leper closes out chapter 1 of Mark. We know the healing of the paralytic comes next, with chapter 2 continuing with more stories where the presence of priests and scribes observing and questioning Jesus and his disciples about, well, everything under the sun begins. All of this is done because the word has spread far and wide about Jesus and his miracles. I included the cross references here to the other Gospels that cover these stories as well for us. Matthew, Mark, and Luke are known as the synoptic Gospels because they are so similar in their content. The versions of the story with the leper are nearly identical with one another in all three Gospel accounts, with only Luke adding some different details to the story for us to kind of get a bigger picture of what else was involved with the story. One is that after the multitudes come far and wide to be healed by Jesus, is that Luke finishes saying that Jesus withdrew himself to get alone again with the Father and prayed. This kind of piggybacks on our sermon last week, with here again Jesus being shown to go to prayer, being a fundamental component of his ministry. And we see that typical pattern of Jesus having big crowds come after him. He retreats to get alone, and then another big event comes right after that. The other detail is that Luke says that the man was full of leprosy. What this means is that the man's condition has reached its critical point where it is likely that he's going to die very soon from leprosy. Luke would understand this state as Paul says that he was a physician by trade. You see Luke showcasing his medical knowledge in Acts as well when he describes the scales that were on Paul's eyes when he was pronounced or given blindness after the road to Damascus. Side note here is that Paul in 2 Timothy 4:11 said that Luke journeyed with him during his missions. It's these kind of details that give you confidence in authentic and early authorship of Luke and the other Gospels. Critics' beef with early Lucan authorship for the Gospel and Acts is the supernatural predictive prophecy problem that they have on their hands if the books were written before 70 AD, as Jesus predicted the temple being destroyed 40 years in advance. The other reason why they want to undermine Lucan authorship is because they want to slam on the nativity stories, namely the census of Cyrenius in Luke's Gospel. But going back to the leper and Luke's comment on full of leprosy, is that it helps us understand easily why this leper is coming to Jesus. And as all three accounts say, that he fell down in front of Jesus, Matthew saying that he worshiped him, that acknowledges his lordship. We all understand that the only thing that Jesus had to do here was just say a word and, prove the leprosy's gone, right? But why did Jesus say, tell no one, but go straight to the priests as a testimony unto them? Jesus is up to something here because none of his other healings did he instruct the person to go directly to the priest and to tell them what had happened to them. So, what's up with this? To understand why Jesus was instructing the cleansed leper in this fashion starts with Jesus citing the Mosaic law for ritual cleansing of healed lepers that is found in Leviticus 14. I promise you that we are not going to read both chapters that deal with leprosy in Leviticus. If you want to go kind of bore your mind with that, go for it. It's hard to stay in tune with it, but we're not going to do that. The ritual cleansing process starts with the healed person going to the priest, though, to show that the leprosy is no longer present on their body. Jesus also noted that the man must offer all the things that are in the law. So Jesus is following the law here. But he also knows that the temple priests have to as well. Just to give you a glimpse of all the things that were involved in this ritual cleansing, is that the leper, or the healed leper, would have to bring 2 alive clean birds, there's unclean birds and clean birds, along with things to the priest, with one of the birds being killed in a vessel over running water. The still alive bird and the other stuff are dipped in the blood of the now deceased bird. I know this probably sounds a little odd to us, but in the ancient world, ritualistic cleansing was just that. It was a ritual, and it was just a symbolic act of what was the big thing that was happening to actual people. After the dipping, the priest has to sprinkle the blood 7 times over the leper and pronounce him clean, while the still living bird is being set free in an open field to fly away on its own. That is symbolically representing that the healed leper can now go anywhere that the person wants. Before, if they're in that condition, they're going to be isolated, likely living in a leper colony, if you will. Lepers had extremely hard lives during this time. They basically lived in quarantine and lockdowns their entire life. Some situations, they could get near a synagogue if their condition wasn't that bad. And so it gave them a little bit of access to, being in communion and hearing the word of God from temple priests. But you really had no sense of real fellowship with other people. You had to be still isolated away from them. So if you thought that, church in Zoom during the COVID lockdown was rough, just try to imagine what that was like your entire life. These guys also had to announce, unclean, unclean, as they walked down roads if they saw people coming towards them. It was their way of basically announcing, hey, look, I'm a leper. You're going to want to stay away from me. So you can imagine the stigma that's going to come with these people is that, they're dirty, they're unclean, and, just stay away, they're disease-filled. So after all of that, bird stuff, the ritual kept going on even until the 8th day, where the healed leper brings 3 lambs, flour, and oil to the priest at the tabernacle, which in Jesus' day would be the actual temple in Jerusalem. And the priest has to perform the sacrifices on behalf of the man for different types of offerings. Needless to say, is that this is a very big process, and the whole temple priesthood would know what is going on. Now, what if I told you that there is not one example of this taking place in the entire Old Testament? What would that mean? Basically, what you need to start thinking about is also what would that mean in the broader context of Jesus' statement that would be a testimony unto them? What this means is that Jesus is indirectly sending a messenger to the temple priests to basically declare that he is the Messiah. Now, if you're not seeing that link, let me build a case for you on that. Leprosy in the Old Testament has only a handful of actual cases being described in it. It's not that it was uncommon, it's just that these are the only places where the Old Testament describes it. Medically speaking, biblical leprosy is not how we probably think of it in today's terms. Basically, leprosy now is called Hansen's disease, where it can reach the point where fingers, toes, and even limbs can get to the point of deterioration where they fall off. It's a very very disgusting disease and tough to see any images of. Nobody in the modern medical world really has nailed down what was biblical leprosy. And so with that, it's kind of hard to say, well, it was this type of skin disease, and even their hair would turn white. nobody really knows what it was. It's something that just eventually faded away over time. Out of all these listed verses, here are the contexts for how the entire Old Testament discusses leprosy. Most of it surrounds the priestly handling of leprosy, with only 5 named people and 4 unnamed people having specified cases of it in the Old Testament. I listed the cause here and their final status as well because it's going to serve our purposes. Moses' hand was done to demonstrate to the Israelites that God had appeared to him at the burning bush. So he could put his hand in and out of his cloak, and it would go from white back to normal to show that God is truly with him to the Israelites. Remember, the other demonstration was what? Throw the rod down, it would turn into a snake, grab it, and come back into a rod. Miriam's was for her rebellion against Moses in the wilderness. Moses begged God to instantly heal her, which he did, but she still had to be punished for her rebellion, and so she was removed from the camp for 7 days to symbolically say that she was unclean from being inside the camp. Naaman, the Syrian commander, had a natural case of leprosy, with his king asking the northern king of Israel for help in the matter, with Naaman ending up receiving instructions from Elijah the prophet that told him that he needed to go dip himself into the Jordan 7 times. Naaman thought it was dumb and it was too simple that he just wanted to avoid it. Why can't I just go over to, the Damascus River? What's the big deal? And he, eventually got convinced, like, did he ask you to do something hard? No. Okay, then just go do it in the Jordan. So he finally does it, and it convinced him because after 7 times of going up and down, he was miraculously healed. The Jordan River wasn't containing special healing waters. It's just the fact that he followed the instructions coming from the prophet of the God of Israel. Elisha's servant, Gehazi, ended up receiving leprosy as a punishment for his greed in the same story because he wanted to take the silver and gold offered by Naaman that Elisha refused. You can see God here punish not just Gehazi, but also all of his descendants forever. The 4 unnamed lepers in 2 Kings 7 had it naturally, with their story being more about the Syrian forces and they needing to get food, and it's not really focused on their leprosy per se. King Uzziah received it as divine punishment because of his pride. He was doing some good in the land by getting removed of idols and stuff, but he got a little bit big in the head and he wanted to go into the temple and offer incense himself. So he walked in and the priests were like, dude, no, that's not your role, that's ours, stay out of here. And he refused. And eventually God threw leprosy on his forehead and he's like, oh, okay, I'm out of here. But he still had it up until his death. Overall, though, is that with all these cases, Leviticus 14's ritual never occurred. And when you look at the 3 healed cases, is that the only time that they were healed was when God supernaturally healed them. There were no antibiotics or herbal remedies to combat leprosy in this time. Once you got it, your only hope was for God to intervene and heal you. Chronologically, Moses and Miriam's predate the Levitical requirements as to why we don't see it being performed in their cases as well. And with Naaman is that since he was a Syrian and not a Jew, is that Leviticus 14 would not be applied to him either. It's interesting that part of Moses' final speech to the Israelites before his death was to remind them to diligently follow the Levitical law concerning leprosy. Yet, it's never occurred. He had a lot of things he could say, and this he found important enough to shove it in there in his speech. Yet, from that point on, and all the way up until Jesus' time, there wasn't one recorded use of Leviticus 14 being done. So that roughly 1500-year period, coupled with the idea that leprosy was more seen as a punishment from God for sin than a natural occurrence, gave rise that a sign of the Messiah would be the healing of lepers. In the ancient world, which included Judaism, diseases and other situations were seen as divine punishments from God or their gods. You get that sense from these stories, along with verses like Leviticus 14:34, where God does declare that he does inflict leprosy on people, which made Jews come to this very conclusion, that it was coming from God. In the Dead Sea Scrolls, which is the Essenes, another Jewish group like the Pharisees and Sadducees, is that there's a similar story to Nebuchadnezzar's madness found there that describes the king of Babylon, Nabonidus, being inflicted with an evil ulcer, and that he was only healed from it when a Jewish exorcist had pardoned him of his sins. The same thought continued past the New Testament era, so we're talking like the 2nd and 3rd century AD, into the Talmud period, with rabbis teaching the same thing, that illness comes as a punishment from God for their sin. And leprosy was explicitly said to be caused by a person's transgressions. We see this type of thinking as well in the New Testament, with Jesus' very own disciples in John asking Jesus, why was this man born blind? Was it because of his parents' sin, or was it his own? And Jesus said, neither. He was born this way so the works of God could be performed. Leprosy was seen as a divine punishment in other pagan cultures as well. Herodotus, a Greek historian, described the Persians seen as a result for their sin against their sun god. This adds to the Naaman story, because Naaman, being a pagan from Syria, and his king realizes that the pagan gods are not helping Naaman out, is that he sends him off to Israel, and when he gets healed there, he recognizes that the only true living God is the God of Israel. So, bundling all that together is that you can see why healing a leper became a sign of the Messiah's arrival over the course of time. And this becomes more apparent to us now with all the things that Jesus said in relation to leprosy in the Gospels. When sending out the 12, he told them to heal the sick, cleanse the lepers, raise the dead, and cast out devils. All these miracles are supernatural. And it announced to everybody in that region that the Messiah has arrived, and since these were his disciples, they would say, okay, Jesus is the Messiah. Jesus' response to a disciple of John the Baptist when he was in prison was to tell John that he was the chosen one, the Messiah, because of all the works that are being done. Jesus here is telling John that he is fulfilling Isaiah 35:5 and 61:1 as proof that he is the one sent by God. Isaiah 29:16's description of the dead being raised could also come to John's mind as well here. But notice within all these, and try to link them up with their color coordinated here, is that leprosy is not part of Isaiah's descriptions at all. But Jesus still plugged it in there. And the reason why he did that was because it did become a messianic expectation at that time. Earlier in Jesus' ministry, Luke records his rejection in Nazareth. While he explained to the whole town, remember that, no prophet is welcome in their own town, and, they're getting into it with Jesus because they're like, hey, then show us all these signs. And he's just, like, all right, this isn't about, you actually want to embrace me. But during that, he cites that many lepers were in the time of Elijah, the prophet, but the only one that was healed was Naaman. So, after 1,500 years of no Leviticus 14 rituals being done, the temple priests are now getting bombarded with healed lepers coming to their door, showing their healed bodies and that they had been healed by Jesus or his disciples. I personally like to think that this was just basically endless weeks of this ritual now taking place over and over again at the temple, and where it basically kept proclaiming over and over again, the Messiah has arrived. The word is going to spread throughout all of Jerusalem. The uproar is going to ensue as well. And which is seen because at the end of the story of Mark here, we were told that crowds from everywhere came to find Jesus to be healed. All of this perfectly makes sense as to why Jesus told the newly healed leper that it would be a testimony unto the priests. It's a miracle that cannot be explained by anyone. The priest's very own temple records would know all the people who have leprosy, they know their current conditions, and they have to make sure that they're staying away from people. People also know that these people and their physical skin conditions as well. So if you're going from a ghostly white on your deathbed look to all of a sudden you're miraculously healed, or basically you're back to normal looking, the only conclusion that a person can walk away was God supernaturally healed this person. So yes, Jesus knew what he was doing here. He knew what he was doing by sending this guy to the temple to get checked out. He was letting the entire Jewish priesthood know that he sees himself as the Son of God. He didn't say, I'm the Messiah. He said it in different ways. And this is the type of messaging that would trigger a response from them, where the temple will have to send out their investigators to find out if this Jesus up in the Galilee area, if he truly is the Messiah. And this investigation begins in chapter 2 in Mark, starting with the healing of the paralytic, which will come next week.
Reminder, hit the subscribe button below, turn on the notification bell, hit the like button, and leave a comment. And don't forget to visit us at justgrouper.org. But in the meantime, stay salty.